Now, Michelle, we are the Hyperion Adventures podcast. We love the Hyperion family, but there is another member of the Hyperion family that is way more established, way above us. I don't know if they're the great uncle, big brother, whatever you want to call it. They are the Hyperion Historical Alliance. And, we've talked about them before on this show. We've had guests from them before on this show. And guess what? We have guests joining us again from the Hyperion Historical Alliance, Michelle.
I know. And it's always a treat and it's always an honor. And we're very much looking forward to this particular show. We have a lot of great things that we're looking forward to talking about, and so happy for the guests that we have joining us.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get to them. We'll tell you a little bit about them. First, our first guest is Paula Sigman-Lowery. She currently serves as the corporate secretary for the Hyperion Historical Alliance, which is an organization, if you don't know, of career academic professionals advancing studies in Disney history. In addition to that, she is an internationally recognized expert on Walt Disney and the history of the Walt Disney Company, a former archivist for the Walt Disney Archives. She was one of the lead creative consultants in the design and development of the Walt Disney Family Museum. Wow. She spent 20 years at Disney, where she served as creative manager, writer for Disney character voices, and was the founding manager of the Walt Disney Collector Society. In addition to her role as an archivist, she has continued to serve as a creative consultant, writer, consulting historian for the Walt Disney Family Museum, as well as for several divisions of the Walt Disney Company. She has also served as a story consultant for Disney exhibitions traveling in Japan, including inside the Walt Disney Archives, and as the lead curator of the Disney 100, the exhibition, the groundbreaking traveling exhibition celebrating the wonder of Disney from 1923 to the present and into the future. And she also supports the archives of the D23 Expo exhibitions and programs. So what an incredible resume for her. But that's not it. We also have another guest, Jim Hollifield. He is a renowned historian, author, and editor. He has an extensive career in communications, public relations, and marketing. He currently sits on the board of directors of the Hyperion Historical Alliance and is the organization's publications co-director. He's also the man behind the fantastic HHA Facebook page that you should definitely be following. Paula Sigman-Lowery, Jim Hollifield, welcome to the other Hyperion, the Hyperion Adventures podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
That's a great introduction. I have a lot to live up to follow Paula.
We all do. We all do.
No.
We have a lot to live up to you, Jim, much less her.
It's incredible.
We're all a family of people who appreciate the Disney legends and legacy. And it's our privilege to be able to share it with the public and more of the public at large. Yeah. We were a very quiet little organization when we began all those years ago, but we're kind of stepping out of the shadows now with our publications and some of our presentations.
Well, we're going to get a lot into the Hyperion Historical Alliance, a lot of that. But before we get into that, we want to know a little bit more about you. Let's start with you, Paula. How did you get first? Where did your Disney fandom come from? And how did you get first involved in the Walt Disney Company?
Okay, well, not wanting you to do the math, but I will tell you that I was at Disneyland opening year. My father took me. I was tiny. And all I really remembered about it was a very long drive. and my father and a friend of his took me because my mom was home with my baby sister. And I remember them telling me when we were going through the Snow White adventures that I should be glad that I was so small, because then I wasn't getting bothered by the cobwebs and the spiders in the dark ride. So that was probably one of my first engagements with Disney. And I am told that my very first cuddle toy was a Mickey Mouse. I do not remember that, but I do remember the first visit to Disneyland. And then, of course, watching the Mickey Mouse Club, and that was that, and the Sunday night show. But the Mickey Mouse Club was so interesting to me because it engaged children who were actually older than I was, um, but I felt I was a part of it. And the whole idea about the Mickey Mouse Club was that as if you watched the Mickey Mouse Club regularly, you were a Mouseketeer, you were a member of the Mickey Mouse Club. And I love that inclusivity. And then, of course, going to Disneyland. I live in Southern California. Going to Disneyland once a year was the biggest thing in our lives. You couldn't sleep the night before, and driving, it would be a contest who could see the first Disneyland billboard. So I always appreciated and loved the Disney films, the Disney television shows. And then I went into what I thought would be my career, which would be a children's librarian and storyteller. So maybe the storytelling thing got to me. And we used to dress up at UCLA for the Halloween. And here I was in grad school. And I remember I came on Halloween dressed in a Snow White costume that I had made. I had dark hair. And, it was just an ordinary thing and nothing beyond that. Except that just while I was in school at UCLA, the local television station began running the Mickey Mouse Club again. And I said, I want to see this and see if it's still as good as I remember it being. So I actually made sure that my schedule allowed me to drive home and see the Mickey Mouse Club. And that's an important thing, which will come around in a moment. But yes, it was every bit as good as I remembered. So I'm now graduating from library school, planning to be a children's librarian. And I was doing storytelling. And I get a call from the dean of the library school. And he said, Paula, I know it's not children's work, but the Walt Disney Archives is looking for a librarian, someone who knows how to do research. And I think you would be really good. Maybe he remembers seeing me come to class as Snow White. I don't know. But I went to my interview with Dave Smith, the founder of the Walt Disney Archives, and we're different generations. And as we were talking, I said, well, I grew up and experienced Disney in a different way than you did. And for example, I know all the days of the week on the Mickey Mouse Club. I can sing all those songs.
Nice.
Thank you for letting me see that again before I had this interview. And he realized that potentially bringing me in as someone who had learned to be a reference librarian, learn how to help people. That's what the archives, a business archives, is there to support the organization and to help the people in the organization find the information that they need. And that's a really important thing for a company like Disney, for which its history is so important. It's the family-founded, family-run companies that tend to have the archives. And Dave Smith founded the archives. And so we knew how to research the files that we had and where to go for information. And so I did that for 15 of my 20 years with the company, and working to help all the other areas of the company. But we were also at that time very open to the public, to students who were wanting to do stories or essays or even theses on Disney. So we worked with a lot of high school and college students. And I really loved that because that was my being a librarian part. And then I moved on to a couple of other areas of the company. And I left when my husband and I had a baby, and I thought I'd worked for 20 years. And I just never stopped working for the various divisions of the Walt Disney Company. So last year was was my 50th year of working for Walt.
Wow.
And that included being asked by Diane Disney Miller and her family to help them figure out how to tell Walt's story in what would become the Walt Disney Family Museum. And I still work for them. So it's been my whole professional life.
Nice.
Amazing.
Yeah. In fact, that was something I wanted to ask you about. What was that moment for you when Diane Disney asked you to help with this very important project of doing creating the Walt Disney Family Museum?
There wasn't really a single moment because they'd actually been working with someone before they realized that the approach wasn't the correct approach. But I had met Diane on previous occasions, and actually one of the little mini projects that I did for her and the family was they had put together a CD-ROM. Remember CD-ROMs?
Yes.
And so they working with another wonderful pair of researchers, the Greens, they put together a CD-ROM on the man behind the myth, and they also made a wonderful film based on that. And I was hired by the Disney company who was going to release it to write the program notes, the marketing copy and program notes on the back of that volume, the box. And so I wrote it, and I'm told that when Diane read the copy, she said, "Who wrote this?" And they said, "Why? Is there something wrong?" And she said, "No, it's the first thing I've read that I haven't had to revise." And so they said, "Oh, it was by somebody named Paula. She used to work," and she said, "Paula from the archives." So that led to more conversations. And my husband was an animation art dealer, and when she started collecting art for her family, because Walt didn't bring the art home. He really didn't. He brought other kinds of art home, but not the studio art form. He didn't collect that. He didn't need to. And she wanted to get art for her children and grandchildren. And so she came to my husband, and we helped her pick pieces, the first pieces that she brought into her family. And the Family Museum has done a book recently on the collections, and there's this lovely picture of the very first piece that she bought from us. And that was when she said, "If we ever do a museum, I want you and your husband involved." So that was it. So it was not a single moment. It was a build up to that.
Very nice. Very
Amazing.
nice.
We haven't made it to the Walt Disney Family Museum yet, and are embarrassed to say, even though we lived in California for many, many years. But we're very excited because I think coming up later this month, we're going to be booking the D23 member cruise in
DVC.
2027, or excuse me, DVC member cruise in 2027, which is stopping overnight in San Francisco. We have a feeling that the Walt Disney Family Museum will be accessible during that. So we're excited.
We did a special tour for members of the DVC cruise for the 10th anniversary of the museum. And I got to take people through. It was really nice.
Can't wait. Very, very excited to get up there and see that.
So that's my career in a nutshell.
Wow.
Nice.
That's a very large nut. I'm going to tell you that right
Very
now.
impressive.
Very big.
Yeah.
It is very big.
But the
Jim,
big one was the 100th anniversary. Let me just say the big one was the 100th anniversary, because I thought being asked by Walt's family to help them tell Walt's story was going to be the highlight of the apex of my career. And then when the archives said, "We're going to do a traveling exhibition, and we don't have the bandwidth right now to be the curators of it, and we need someone who has a broad perspective." So then being asked by the company to help them figure out how to tell 100 years of Disney history in one exhibit, that, Disney family, Disney company, it's right there.
wow.
Well, especially for such a major milestone as the century celebration. So
That's incredible.
Very good.
Yeah, and well deserved.
Yeah.
Amazing. Jim, okay, so let's hear from you. How did your love for Disney start? And then how did you progress into the role you have now?
Absolutely. Well, when I was younger, I worked a couple of years at the Disney store in my early 20s, and I was always fascinated to learn about the history of the company. But it goes back even earlier for me. I grew up in Davy Crockett's hometown in East
Oh,
Tennessee. That's a town called Morristown, about an hour north of Knoxville. And so as a kid, I would hear all of these marvelous stories from my dad and his generation about how Fess Parker came to town in 1955 for the town's centennial as part of the promotional publicity campaign for the release of Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. So, I would hear a lot about Disney and Davy Crockett, and then, and God bless the librarians, because I guess it was a little bit of a Disney town. The library there every Saturday had a children's library a librarian who would screen 16 millimeter prints, and inevitably every other film would have been a Disney film. And so I saw so many of the classics that way. This is pre-home video, in the late 70s. So we would see a lot of featurettes and the shorts, and I think she was a big fan of Sterling Holloway, because I can remember The Little House and Susie the Blue Little Coop
wow.
and Edward the Sheepish Lion and the Peter and the Wolf segment, from Make Mine Music. And but as it progressed, when I got to high school, the reading room and the archives room of the library, they had a whole folder of the correspondence between the studio and Fess Parker and the town 30 years earlier about that very famous visit that I had heard about. And I got to see the photos, and it was really, I got a sense of how that came about. And it was about that same time then home video started. The Disney Channel came along, and this is pre-internet movie database. And so I would furiously scribble down the credits, and then I'd run back to the library and I'd pull out film encyclopedias to see, oh, what else did they do? And it was a really organic learning experience. And then about the time that The Fox and the Hound was reissued in 1988, I watched that episode from 1981 called The Illusion of Life that was tied into the release of the famous book by Frank and Ollie. And it had Pearl Bailey on there. And so when I went and looked up Pearl Bailey, I found that she also was a writer, and she had written lots of books. So it was about that time I began writing some of the people that I'd look up addresses and say, I wasn't just writing for a photo or a fan thing. I would ask them specific questions. What was it like making this film? And when you did an animated voice, what was this like? And when my mom picked me up from school one day, and this box came from Pearl Bailey, and she'd sent an animation cell of Big Mama the Owl, the character that she voiced.
Oh,
But she honed in on the fact that I was interested in writing. And she told me about her own interest and how she'd gone back to school. She sent me several of her books and encouraged me to pursue writing, and said, I want to hear from you. And so my first article that I ever sold as a freelance writer, I was able to send to Pearl Bailey, and I still have the letter. She wrote back and said, I knew you could do it. But
Wow.
the marvelous thing was I was able to correspond with a lot of people that had worked for Walt, like Larry Landsberg, who is a member of the El Grupo team that we later cover in the HHA press. There was a voice actor named Candy Candido who did a lot of voices in the animated films. Well, his daughter lived over in North Carolina, so he would come visit his daughter. And when I was in college, I'd drive over and see her. So I majored in journalism, and I moved to New York, and Candy Candido had another daughter who worked for the Rockefeller Foundation. And so I would have lunch with her. And there was another voice actor named David Frankham, who was the voice of Sergeant Tibbs the cat in 101 Dalmatians. And he had started as a BBC reporter. And so he also encouraged me to pursue journalism and a writing career. And many of these people told me just fascinating stories. And sometimes I didn't even know at the time, but a few years ago, someone said, hey, have you read the autobiography of the director of The Great Locomotive Chase? And I said, no, I haven't seen that. And they said, well, you should get a copy. He reproduced the fan letter you wrote him in high school 30 some years ago. So that's how I learned. And I went off to journalism school. I moved to New York. I did an internship for a movie critic. I worked in the evening proofreading film and theater books. And eventually I came back to Knoxville, and I was a newspaper reporter, and I had an assignment one night. Who wants to go interview Mary Costa, the voice of Sleeping Beauty? Because Mary was also an East Tennessee native, and she had retired and moved back. And so I went and did a story about Mary, and we hit it off. And she introduced me to Howard Green, a vice president of communications for Disney. And I had corresponded with Howard back in high school because I would write film reviews for the high school newspaper. And God bless again the archivist, because I would write Dave Smith, and he was so patient, and he would answer these questions and say, "Well, I'll look this up, and here's a copy from a press book, and here's the answer to your question." So we find that a lot of people who really take a deep, abiding interest in Disney want to know more about Disney. And so that's how I came into just striving to learn more about Disney and then writing about Disney. And that really ties into the mission of the Hyperion Historical Alliance, a network of historians, archivists, preservationists, writers, journalists, people who have had career legacy contacts with the company, all of this networking together to tell these stories and keep them alive for new generations to discover.
Well, and not just, I think that is a very important goal of the HHA, but looking at, young people who may want to do research like you did, or just have that connection with people who are in the know. This is a great resource. I mean, I think it's very impressive that you did do those connections with individuals. And here's another avenue now that you all are offering people to be available to ask those questions and to make those connections and to get information to further other connections. And that's so important these days.
And the wonderful thing about the HHA as a community is part of our mission is to be there and help each other. So when we founded, before even the founding of the HHA, and this goes back to the launch, the opening of the Walt Disney Family Museum, a gentleman named Didier Guez, who had worked for Disney in France, he organized a lunch of other people who are interested in Disney history. And that began a series of perhaps annual lunches or occasional dinners at the Tam O'Shanter in Los Angeles, in the Los Feliz area. And the Tam O'Shanter was often very jokingly called the Hyperion Studios commissary because it was so close, and everybody would go down there for lunch. And when we would have these lunches and dinners, we would each say what we were working on. Because if you share what you're working on, someone else in the group might say, well, wait, I have something that might be helpful to you. So that was the genesis of the Hyperion Historical Alliance, a group of people all interested in different aspects of Disney history, but wanting to preserve it, and particularly looking outside of what's available in the archives, because unlike the archives back in the day when we were really able to be open for visitors, the archives is not open for just students wanting to come in, anyone wanting to come in and do research. And that's no longer their priority, because the needs of the company have grown so broad that they need the archivists and the history and the photography, all of that. The photography used to be part of the public publicity department, and then the archives took over all of that historic collection, and everything started to come really into the archives to serve the company in a much broader and deeper fashion. And so it's finding now historical records that are kept by the families of the people who work there and who may no longer be there, but their memories remain, but they're outside the company. And this is where the HHA can go and help them preserve scan, make available the materials that they have in their possession so that the information can be shared and disseminated.
Nice.
Yeah, it's incredible stuff that the HHA is doing. I mean, I'm really, really impressed. And you hear about, well, we had Didier Guez on a couple times on the show, and he's phenomenal. But all the stuff that you know all the authors have been doing in the past, and we hear things that are coming in the future, and some of the things I love about the monographs that the HHA is putting out is the fact that yes, you could use them literally for research papers. I mean, they're that interesting. They have that much detail. There's that much history involved in them, and yet you could also just as easily put them on your coffee table, and people could leaf through it and enjoy it because there's so many historic pictures and photos and fascinating stuff. They are really, really interesting pieces of art. I'm just going to say it, but the alliance itself doing so many great things to protect Disney history and find more Disney information and history throughout the country. It's truly amazing, right, Michelle?
Right. Go ahead, Paula.
I was just going to say we go to great lengths. We have we're not a part of the Walt Disney Company, but our publications are licensed through the Walt Disney Company. And so, and they recognize that the work we are doing it's very niche. These are not the kind of books that Disney Editions would be able to publish because you couldn't sell enough. We are a nonprofit, so everything that we put into these publications, any monies that come back to us over and above our costs go right back into the next projects. And the company really recognizes that. So they approve the projects that we're going to work on. They provide us with the access to material and we have to apply for that access, but they also know that we will go to great lengths to confirm the accuracy and authenticity of what we are doing. And because they know that our audience is an adult audience, it's an audience of people who do want to go deep, and we want to show images that have not been seen before. So many of those images are not from the company. They come from outside collections, but they're very generous with us in allowing us to show perhaps more than any other publishing company would be able to do. Our publications are limited in size, carefully curated, so that we try to make the most of the limited number of images that we're able to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and Jim, maybe you can speak to this. You're talking about, you all are talking about authenticity and everything. I mean, what is the Alliance doing, or how do they make sure that the information that they are putting out or publishing is something you can count on, is something that is real?
That's a great question. And in this era of internet urban myths and social media, there's so much out there now. And I really do fear sometimes for some of the younger people who just latch on to anything because it's accessible, just because it's easy to find. Mm-hmm. And this network, first of all, we have a larger editorial team that includes Paula and Libby Spatz, who's also an archivist within the Walt Disney Company in the Consumer Products Division. And then several of the archivists will read the manuscripts as well and vet the information. So they're keeping us honest. So they're double checking facts and dates and figures. And then we have others within the network that are experts. Sometimes they've worked for the company or they've specifically researched certain topics and they have a depth of expertise. And take the most recent publication, which is Mickey Mouse in the 1930s Christmas. That had several dates. We would go look up, well, what date did Thanksgiving 1936 fall on? That's the kind of thing that we want to verify because you only get one chance to do it correctly. And once it's in print, it's out there. And so the association really takes that process very seriously. And we hope to set an example for other authors and historians and those who are really serious about Disney history to follow.
So
Excellent.
just to add to that, every quote, we show the sources. We have end notes for each of these publications that show exactly where the information we are using comes from. Now, history isn't frozen, because it changes when we get new information. So these are as accurate as they can be at the time that we have these sources available to us. But someday something new will come along, and it will change how we interpret and maybe change a little bit of that history. So the great thing about these publications, they are more academic in that they have end notes which provide additional context to the story that you're reading as you go through the monographs or the annual essays. And they're fully indexed. So if you do want to use them as reference material, you can do that. That's a lot of extra work, but we're not just telling a story, we're telling where the story comes from.
Excellent. Well, that's actually a good lead in. There are several publications out, they're monographs that we'd love to talk about. The most recent one, as Jim mentioned, is Mickey Mouse in the 1930s, the Christmas season, written by Didier Guez. And so I guess our first question is, why focus specifically 1930s Mickey Mouse? What was so compelling either about that character in that era, or, what was the draw to go to that time period for Mickey Mouse?
This was originally designed as three chapters of a monograph that turned into what may become, not promising, but may become other aspects of the 1930s. But if I can take us back to Mickey's debut in 1928 and how he was an immediate sensation, what these 1930s looks at the 1930s show us what's happening in the culture, not just in the US but around the world, the impact that this Mickey Mouse and his companions had on the world in merchandising, in public entertainment. So the Mickey Mouse and the Christmas season in the 1930s, which is Didier's book about that, there are parades, holiday parades. There are department store windows that tell stories or come to life with mechanical figures. There are live puppet shows held through the seasons. So we're seeing the impact of the popularity of Mickey Mouse and how he has stepped off the screen and into people's lives. And the 1930s, Libby Spatz, whom Jim just mentioned, she's the archivist for consumer products. She has just finished almost finished the text of the Mickey Mouse Club of the 1930s, because beginning actually in late 1929, there were Saturday morning screenings at your local theater, and it would include children as a club, with membership cards and a credo that they would, be good citizens. And there's just wonderful stories about how the character of Mickey Mouse and the world of Disney really had an impact on families, on children growing up, as well as on the merchandising and the popularity of toys and household goods. So that is a whole nother story. And I believe Didier has also worked on one on Mickey Mouse on stage and radio. So these publications take a long time to come out. And possibly it may they may never come out, but we're trying. It's there. We're all volunteers. And so we have volunteer designers, we have volunteer
Nice.
editors, volunteer proofreaders. It is a village.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. And I guess, I mean, it shows the strength, one, of this monograph, but also, of course, Mickey Mouse as a character in the season of Christmas, that apparently this sold very, very well on Stewarding Books, which is where you can find all the Hyperion Historical Alliance monographs and all their works. We're going to post a link to that. So if you ever want to look up any of these things we're talking about today, you can find it there. Apparently it pretty much sold out. Is that right, Jim?
The early copies that came in right before Christmas did indeed sell out. And then the full shipment arrived in late January, and there's still copies available. But I think the early response has been very encouraging. And we knew, to Paula's point, that Mickey Mouse is just universally beloved. And one thing that I liked about this particular story was it appeared in the 1930s that Mickey almost began to eclipse Santa Claus in terms of popularity. I mean, it's a really interesting story. So it's very festive, and you'll learn so much, even about parades overseas in Europe, and then the Macy's Day Parade, and how the giant oversized balloons came to be. There's just so much about not just Christmas, but the other holidays as well.
So what would you say makes this monograph stand out compared to other books maybe that have been published in the past about Mickey, because this is very unique, but what would you say to that?
It's a real deep dive. And so the purpose of the monograph series is to take that esoteric slice that it could just maybe get covered with a paragraph or a page or two in other books that we've seen, but the series allows us to go into really in-depth detail. And so in this new edition, Didier goes through all of these aspects, even to specific detail about how individual department stores developed their seasonal attractions year after year. They grew in popularity. He even makes the case, people would line up to come see these displays and these early animated interactions. And, it's 20 years before Disneyland, and people are really anticipating taking their kids and the kids wanted to go see Mickey Mouse in person, even if it was an animated cardboard cutout. It's just a really fascinating story.
Right.
And I'd also like to add, in terms of the design of these monographs, and in particular, I'll mention the El Grupo monograph. There have been books written about the El Grupo tour to South America, which was done just before the U.S. got into the World War. And this was part of a goodwill tour that the government asked Walt to take to the southern countries to help bolster the relationship between the U.S. and these countries. And there have been many books and articles about this. But what's so remarkable about Walt Disney and El Grupo's tour is in the design of the book, we've added non-Disney imagery that takes you into these countries. And I think of it as a triptych on their journey, because what this book is their day-to-day activities and where they were each day and what they did and what they saw and what they were working on. But as you flip through it, you're following their journey on maps. You're actually living that day-to-day experience with them. And that's something that our designers have tried to do and make unique in each monograph that comes out. So they are a series, but when you open them up, each monograph is uniquely designed so that the design adds to the storytelling and enhances the text.
Nice.
And that trip log, essentially what it is, it's almost like a diary, the way that monograph is written out, Walt Disney and El Grupo in Latin America. It is amazing because it feels like you were just talking about, Paula. It draws you in like you are part of the trip because it's like we've all, well, many of us have done this, but we go on a vacation and we start, okay, what did we do today? We want to make sure and take notes of it. And so we can look back in, in the future and remember, oh, that was great. Remember what we did that on this day and that on this day. That makes it feel like you are living that adventure. And it really is a
Love it.
phenomenal
Yeah.
book for sure.
I should note that the authors, Ted Thomas and J.B. Kaufman and Didier Guez, they were able to go into some of the personal archives like Ted was able to provide from his father, Frank Thomas, one of the 9 old men. He was on that trip. And there were details and accounts that had been prepared after the fact at the studio. And they were able to go, oh, this maybe had been conflated. And here's where these 3 members actually were on this date. And they provided greater clarity about the day-to-day activities of the group. And so it's probably the most thorough and accurate account of that trip.
Speaking of that, can you talk about how the Hyperion Historical Alliance really helps with capturing that information or preserving and digitizing the material that might otherwise have gone unseen?
Well, the preservation,
Jim,
preservation is a great angle. And so I'll use my own example in terms of El Grupo. Years ago, I was able to help acquire and preserve a great cache of material from a man named Jack Cutting. And he was a member of El Grupo. And he's most remembered with Disney fans. He oversaw dubbing for the Disney films, but he was the foreign relations coordinator. So he had done advanced work down in South America. And so his grandson had preserved a lot of photos and mementos from his grandfather's career. And when he'd sold those off at an auction, I'd bought some of those. And so we were able to go through the photos and go, oh, this is a particular photo that doesn't seem to exist over in the images that we've seen. And so we also went into other archival repositories and other collections, and we were able to acquire a great wealth of information and then compile it to bring the story alive in an entirely new way. And so preservation really is at the heart of even preceding the publications. The HHA was really about identifying collections that maybe were at risk of being lost. Sometimes these are children or grandchildren of longtime Disney employees who they may not even recognize or realize the historical significance of what they've had in the attic for all those years. And so we have members who go in sometimes and help identify those. And in exchange for preserving and digitizing those, the collections then can go into these publications and reach entirely new generations of Disney fans and historians and film buffs.
Wow. So really, the mission of the HHA is threefold. It is indeed the preservation and digitization of this material that sits outside of the Walt Disney Company to supplement and complement what is inside the Walt Disney Company. Number 2 is to develop and nurture a community of these historians and archivists and family members to come together and deepen the relationship between each other so that we are helping each other. And then our third is the dissemination, the sharing of this information. And that's where the publications come in. It's where we've done presentations at the D23 events in Anaheim. We are starting to open up to bring additional guests. When we've had our conferences, it's always been just for the members, but we're opening it up to members and guests and potentially to bring in new people who want to know more and share more about their interests in Disney. And hopefully we can bring in student members and help mentor them as they're going through their own process of writing papers or perhaps making student films. And so we're looking to help develop this next generation of the historians and
Nice.
archivists.
Nice.
That's amazing. Doing great work and then sharing it and passing along, paying it forward and just doing, it's just incredible work that they're doing over at the HHA.
Yeah, and the presentation is so quality. When you look at those books, they are amazing just to look at, but just the wealth of information that's in them is just phenomenal. So thank you for that. I know we want to talk about
We
some of
should
the.
say a word.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say we should say a word about our fabulous designer, Steve Reeser.
Yes.
Steve did those maps that you were talking about in the El Grupo book. He's just a phenomenal talent. And we have other designers too. Gilly Rosenthal and Mark Fleming, they've assisted with the annual articles and the layouts. So as Paula said, it takes a village, and we could not do those layouts without those fantastic.
And I also want to say that we're not just stuck in the 1930s, because we are looking at anything that is, say, 20 years ago or older. We're trying not to impede or get into the world of contemporary Disney storytelling. But we're now looking at the things from the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. And when we have our conferences, we try to have a wide variety of topics in music, film, the parks. And one of the monographs that I'm most looking forward to is a monograph that is many years in the making. It actually got its start at one of our conferences when one of the Imagineers, Tom Morris, was doing a deep dive into the building of Pirates of the Caribbean. And that for him turned into a project that took him all the way to the Library of Congress to study the early days, the beginnings of Walt Disney Imagineering, or WED as it was first known. And to the point where he created a keynote presentation and proposed that as a monograph. And that is very different from the look and feel of the monographs that we've published so far. But to me, it's very exciting because it's almost like a yearbook, taking that first period, the first year leading up to the creation of Disneyland. And so it's going to have a very different look to it. And that is really at Tom Morris's now retired Imagineer. It's his design. It's very mid-century modern. It's very much right in that period. And so in a way, it's going to be a time capsule of that year and all the original players, really from 1953 to 1955. So it's not just film. It's not just travels. It's not just animation. It's all these different areas, and it's going to take us a long time because since we are volunteers, doing all of this at night and on weekends.
Exactly.
Well, that's one of the most incredible things about this.
Yes.
Is the fact that you're all putting together all this amazing work, doing all this research, putting together fantastic artwork, creating these wonderful, wonderful monographs. And yes, a lot of the team volunteering to do so. It's really, really speaks to the HHA for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. We do want to make sure we are mentioning all of the series. I guess the first one was The Making of Walt Disney's Fun and Fancy Free by J.B. Kaufman. Great film. Yes. And it's obviously a fun watch. You can watch it on Disney Plus. But what made the behind the scenes story a strong story to launch this monograph series, actually?
Well, you need to bring J.B. Kaufman onto your onto this podcast to really tell you about that. But it really is such an interesting story because this is coming at a time when they're coming out of World War II, the studio, and during World War II, the government took over the studio lot, and the company was pretty much making just training films, huge amounts of training films, like Frank Capra was doing. This is the work of the Walt Disney Company, keeping it going during this period of time. And so, coming out of that, they need to rebuild. They need to reimagine um, what the Walt Disney Company is going to be. And one of the ways, rather than doing a single fairy tale story, which they'd started on Peter Pan, they'd started on Alice in Wonderland before the war, and then everything got set aside. So it was easier to do what would be sort of colloquially called the package films, which would be to take um, shorter cartoons and create a package feature film that combined them. So in Fun and Fancy Free, which is also using contemporary music. So unlike Fantasia, which was classical music, we're now getting into jazz and other types of music and telling stories to music, just like in Fantasia, but real stories, not just interpretive stories, as Fantasia mostly was. And so it's a turning point in the story of the Walt Disney Company, and it's the success of these package films, Fun and Fancy Free and Melody Time, and uh, things like that, that help get Disney to the point where they think they can go back to a single feature. And the next feature, of course, is going to be 1950 and Cinderella. So these are the predecessors, getting the company back up and running in a creative sense, but doing it in a way that allows them to get it out a little bit more quickly. I hope that's answered
Yes.
your
Yeah.
Very much
question.
so.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
So we've had JB Kaufman on, but not to talk about the making of Walt Disney's Fun and Fancy Free. But we have had Didier Guez on to talk about the origins of Walt Disney's True Life Adventures, which is another phenomenal
Yes.
monograph. For those who didn't get to hear that episode, what could you share with our listeners a little bit about that one as well, and tell what makes that one super special?
As
If
an
you're
editor, Jim, you want to go
Yeah,
ahead?
well, that one, if you're familiar with the True Life Adventure films, and many of those are on the on Disney Plus, you see that, like many of the great Disney stories that we enjoy, it started so many years earlier. So DDA was able to tie in how research on Bambi led to initial interest, and then when the studio began making training films for the military and educational and films for corporations to supplement the war income, that really opened the doors for Walt to begin thinking about other kinds of filmmaking. And we're really glad that that happened, because that series became groundbreaking and won several Academy Awards, and it really set the stage for the 1950s. Because when Disney started its own distribution, Buena Vista Distribution Company, and broke with RKO, they needed entire packages of films to go out to movie theaters. And so the True Life Adventures helped the studio create entire packages that they could offer to exhibitors. But DDA documented all of the evolutionary steps along the way. So it wasn't just Walt deciding to make Seal Island. There were many steps. And that story had never really been told in such a thorough detail. And so you'll learn a ton of Hollywood history, film history, And even in terms of the authenticity and the research that went into the making of those films, and how the filmmakers were encouraged to go spend ample amounts of time to get the coverage and the footage. It's a really fascinating story, especially if you love those true life adventure films and you want to see how they started.
Yes, and it was also very interesting to see, how sometimes very dangerous some of these situations were for the people who were preparing to film these stories.
And it's a great story too. But many of the photographers on those series were couples, husbands and wives. So you start to see the emergence of women who played a great part in the making of those films. With Seal Island, it's Alan and Alma Milat. So you have a woman who's integral, a very important part of that story. So it's a great monograph. I highly recommend it if you've not seen it yet.
And those true life adventures are so integral to Disney as a whole. I mean, obviously the great films they created, but then I mean, do we have an Adventureland if those aren't made? So how does this come about from beginning to where they start filming them to it's a pretty incredible story. So that's amazing, right?
And it's also a story at the end of World War II, when the world is now starting to open up and people are being able to travel. And you think about all of our soldiers and sailors and so on who've come back from other countries. So there's now an interest in the world around us. And that's where you get not only in Disney history, you get not only the true life adventures, but you get the people and places series. And then that leads to when you have the Mickey Mouse Club and you have reporters, young people in other countries telling about what's going on in their country or learning about the products of another country. It's opening up as Americans, it's opening up our eyes to the world around us.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it led to so many other things. I mean, obviously within the Disney company, you think about the Disney nature films that are out now, but even think of things like Jacques Cousteau and some of the, Wild Kingdom and all these things, all these
Yes.
series that came after that, all came from
Yes.
these true life adventures that started it
Yes.
all.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Pretty incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what we've got so far that's out, but we know you've already given a little tease of it. We know there's more coming from the HHA on the horizon. Could you give us a little
Yes.
tease of what is coming down the pipe here within the next year, 2, 3, whatever you got cooking up?
Well, I did mention the project that Tom Morris is working on, and I think that's probably the next the next one coming that we know is coming. And then Libby Spatz is doing this wonderful piece on Mickey Mouse, the Mickey Mouse Club of the 1930s. And Jim is working on a project with Didier for another of my favorite films. And then we also have three wonderful historians who did a presentation at D23 a number of years ago about a journey that they took to a little island where they found the remains, or perhaps the memories, of a home up in one of the trees. And so you might recognize what that's going to be about. And it's about the making of that particular adventure.
Nice.
So there's lots of things that are in the works, but it takes, from the amount of work that is done to go into these, each monograph is probably, I would say, 2 to 3 years in the research, and then it's a year in layout and finalizing the manuscript. So it's years of research in each one of these.
Yeah. Yes, I'm sure. And
And
it
then we have
shows.
our annuals.
Well, I was
We
just
have-
going to thank you. I was just going to bring that up.
And we've got color cover for our latest annual. And these are also available both from Stuart Ing, but also from Amazon. And these are multi-author publications. So they're shorter essays by different authors on different topics. So you might have Jim's article about Mary Costa and her longtime husband, Frank Tashlin, and how their marriage brought them together and the different journeys that their careers took. The path to Walt Disney World. Is it still there, Jim? The Celebrity Sports Center under a different name now. But Walt Disney had essentially he and some other Hollywood personnel bought into what they called Celebrity Sports Center in Denver. And it was a bowling alley and a swimming pool and so forth. And so another of our authors did a whole deep dive into the building and operating of Celebrity Sports Center and the lessons that were learned that lead to the beginnings of Walt Disney World. So again, we're showing the seeds that were planted from which these wonderful other projects grow. So these are all black and white, minimal illustrations, but wonderful essays. And again, everything fully endnoted and so that you can see where the sources are.
And in several of our annuals, we've been very fortunate. We've had contributions from several members of the Walt Disney Archives team.
Yes.
One of my favorites was the article that Kevin Kern, who manages research for the archives, he wrote probably the definitive account of the Mary Poppins premiere.
Yes.
It's a fantastic piece. I highly recommend that one from a few years ago.
Wow.
Nice.
Yes.
That's phenomenal.
And they're minimal cost, I think. So
Yeah.
We all of our publications are done in association with Loyola Marymount University. So these are academically planned and presented so that they hopefully will be on the shelves in libraries for a long time.
Yeah, like I've always said, I mean, I've said it on this show, great reference material can totally be used for that, but also you put that on your coffee table, people are going to look through it. It's phenomenal stuff. It's great stuff. Thank you so much.
Yeah, all filled with gems. They're just like Tom mentioned with the one with Walt Disney El Grupo in Latin American, but all of them, you really are brought into what is happening. It's, you may know the story behind, that you've seen, whether it was a film or the true life adventures. But when you're looking at these books, you're brought right into where the either Imagineers or animators or whomever within the studios was what they were going through. And it really is a unique way to storytelling and to appreciating what was going on.
Yeah, and then the stuff you have coming up here, you teased it, but we know what you're talking about. And oh boy, we're going to be on Stuart Ing books a lot. I mean, we better open up another bank account just to be ready because all that stuff. I'm very excited for. Yep. Just to let you all know, we've already mentioned this, but if you're looking for all these amazing monographs, Stuart Ing books, that's Ing NG. If you're looking for it, you can find it there. The annuals, you said, are also available on Amazon as well, if you're looking for those. So you can find them either at Stuart Ing Books or on Amazon for those. But all the monographs, Stuart Ing Books, we will have a link in the show if you can find them. Amazing. Thank you so very much for sharing all the information, one, about you and your phenomenal lives and careers, more about the Hyperion Historical Alliance. I'm surprised I've made it through the show without messing this up since our name is Hyperion as well. But also just for being amazing people and sharing this with the world. So thank you. Paula Sigman-Lowery, Jim Hollifield, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate you so much.
You are so welcome. It's our pleasure.
Absolutely.